So I can tell how long you've been turning it. Alright, why don't we go the other way? Strongholds turn in the clockwise direction, northern hemisphere. Others and a lot of others made in the southern hemisphere turn in the anti-clockwise direction. And if you use both, like I do, that's why you have to engrave which direction you're using with that particular chuck, so you don't create kindling. Now, it's also a safety feature when you're dealing with something like this to put the tailstock up there to hold it into place. The problem is with your old original Nova, you have to use these two hands to tighten it and your third hand to hold it in the wood, in the chuck jaws, right? Magic tool. Now it doesn't fit this cone on this blade. I'm going to make it work a little bit though. There is my third hand, and it does several things for me. It allows me to make sure that I have some pressure on that piece of wood as I'm tightening it down in the chuck jaws. If I use the pin, that locks it in position. So as you tighten it down, it would not allow the chuck to grip that wood squarely or uniformly, but this acts like a U-joint. It allows it to shift a little bit laterally to make sure that you get it squared into that chuck just perfectly. Now I have to say that one of my degrees is in philosophy. There is no such thing as perfect, but it's pretty daggone close. So now, step 2A, I have reversed it into chuck jaws. I'm going to leave this here as a safety factor because it also keeps that wood from moving a little bit, and it cuts down some of the noise that I'm going to be making. Now, here's where we have the beauty of the side ground hole gouge. And this is where some of you may want to come up and see what's going on. I'm going to use this tool not as a gouge, but as a shearing tool. It really eliminates a lot of sanding. It also eliminates a lot of very poor surfaces, very poor fits, etc. Because what I'm going to do is use this long wing as a shearing tool simply by dropping the handle and applying it to the wood with the flute practically closed. I'm going to be making a shearing cut with the lower wing. I'm not going to hold it flat like a scraper, because what happened then is if you're dealing with certain woods, that flat grain will suck that edge right into it, and you have more kindling and more foul words. So you want to use the wide wing to bridge all the little rings that I have in here already until I have a nice smooth surface. Smooth is good. And if I have tear out in some spalted wood, and I deal with a lot of spalted and ambrosia maple, if I have problems with tear out, I'm going to put a little bit of my lacquer on there. And the way I measure that lacquer is I fill it in an old Minwax wood hardener can. I think Minwax wood hardener is actually thin lacquer. But at least the acetone will not dissolve a plastic bottle, or will not dissolve a steel bottle like it will a plastic bottle. So I've refilled that wood hardener can several hundred times over the years. I have a very precise proportion of lacquer to acetone. One glove. Sometimes it's good. That's about 10%, right?
Absolutely.
Close enough. But acetone is a ketone. It tends to bind a little bit if there was any free water left in that wood. The thin lacquer penetrates better, and it also dries a little bit faster. So it becomes the undercoat, it becomes the sanding sealer, it becomes a lot of things that really help me out in the whole process. So at this stage, before I start hollowing out on the top, I may come down here and power sand this. Nobody cringed. You're going to power sand that square corners when it's spinning? No, you're not. But you can power sand it with the lathe off. And that's a good way to do it. But first I want to shear enough of those ridges away that I don't have to start with an 80 grit gouge. Vince Welch, a friend of mine who runs Vince's Wooden Wonders with the wonderful Blue Flex sanding paper. I I made him some 12 grit sandpaper last year. You know what 12 grit sandpaper is? Gravel glued on cardboard. Yeah, rocks glued on cardboard. Make sure you hand spin that thing before you turn it on. Now, if anybody wants to come look at this, here's what I'm going to be doing. Drop the handle, close that flute, and I'm making a shearing cut. Now this is a little hard to do with this tool rest because I'm hitting the back side instead of the front side. This is the short tool rest. I would rather have the taller ones like I do at home. But what I'm doing now is to actually make shavings, except they're all down there. I'm not creating sanding dust. What I'm doing is refining the surface. You can see where you haven't refined it enough to not start with your 80 grit gouge. See, these are the shavings I'm getting off of there. They're really shavings, they're not sawdust. So by refining that surface now, the problem that you quite often have if you're turning a bowl is that after you hollow out the inside, you quite often will relieve tension that causes that bowl to warp, which means you could never come back to the bottom side because it's not running true anymore. So do your shaping and sanding, step 2A. So now step 2B is to start on the top side. Any questions so far? By sanding these corners at this particular step, I've got a pretty good, you guys did a good sanding job. But I have a nice flat surface now that I can start sanding at 220. I've heard there is such a thing as 80 grit. I don't very often have to use it. So now step 2B, we can get rid of the tailstock. Now, normally you want to get completely rid of the tailstock. Aircraft wouldn't like for me to make a ding in their bench, would they? Don't throw it. So now we've completed the bottom. Step 2B is to start working on the top. And I don't have my pipe on the tool rest post. I just wasted how many seconds having to reposition that thing in the right height. What is the right height? The right height is where the tool ends up in the middle. Now, I could do this particular part of the job with a 5/8 gouge or a 1/2 inch gouge. Remember that the British way of measuring tools is the width of the flute. The American SAE way is the diameter of the tool steel. It's not unusual when you start ordering tools out of the catalog to go, oops, I got the wrong one. Well, you got the one you ordered, but it was a Sorby instead of a Master Cut, and they measured them different. So I like the 5/8 or the 1/2 inch to do this part of the process. The beauty of the 5/8 is it's a pretty good chunk of metal. It's going to be more stable making this cut going in. And this is where we're going to deviate from the method that you would normally use to make a bowl. You would start hollowing the bowl from the center to the edge. The problem with that is if we make this area thin here before we've turned away the wood out here, there's no support. It's going to start doing this, and then you have more kindling. So you have to make what I call a hard cut instead of an easy cut, which is with the grain. And this is where, again, you really need to have good lighting at your lathe so you can see that ghost image up there. Because I can stand here and start this cut. I can run the bevel backwards and find where the wood stops. And I can look down the back side with my left eye, down the front side with my right eye, and if you're cross-eyed, you're in trouble. So you start doing this a little bit at a time, check the process as you go, And I generally like to leave a little bit more wood on the very tip than I will have down here, because then I will not sand it away to a point, making it real thin. Leave yourself a little bit of a fudge factor out there. This is dry, hard sugar maple. So it's not the most wonderful material to work with. Stop and check frequently. Remember to keep all of your body parts behind that tool rest. So now we're going to start working on that edge until we get a uniform thinness from side to side, from edge to edge. That's the goal. That's my goal. It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah, it does. So I can keep doing this side of the cut, or I can make a peeling cut. When I get down to the bottom area where I want to make those two previous cuts smooth and join them together, I simply rotate the tool, drop the needle. Now I can make that shearing cut. Now you don't want to start making it thin down here in the middle, because you have to have the mass of the wood to support. Those things spins forever, doesn't it? You want to have the wood down here to support the cuts up here. Otherwise, they start to flex. Worse with some woods than others. Dense maple is not going to be as much of a problem, except for the fact it likes to chip out. But we still have some ways to go. We're good down to right about here. How many of you use digital calipers? Digital calipers. They're the most accurate ones you have. You can feel any lack of uniformity in the thickness just like that. Sometimes you have to train them. You just don't want to abuse them. But I can tell that it starts to get a little bit thicker right there. So now I don't come back out here to these tips anymore. You only get to do that once. So you can start thinning down this area down in here, without coming clear out to the edge or to the corners, because you run the chance now of breaking those off. Now, one of my criteria is that if I'm going to make a piece that is square and I'm going to evacuate all this wood, I want this shape to be uniform from edge to edge. And I don't worry about this amount of wood in here at this particular point in time. So I can come back now and concentrate on getting it uniformly thin. When you start to get out here in that thin area, you tell the difference in the sound. That's the scary sound out here. It's like a screech. I'm getting closer. Still have a little ways to go. Have you ever seen David Ellsworth Hollow? He becomes one with the tool. Remember, if you're going to make that shearing cut, keep that handle down so that the cutting edge is on the diagonal on the surface of the wood. Never flat, because that's like sticking a chisel straight into that grain when it comes around on the side grain. Now, I'm not going to slave over making it perfectly thin, but we don't want to you know, when you're doing hollow vessels, there's a little hole in the top, and occasionally the inside becomes a larger diameter than the outside, and then it's a vase, and then a bowl, and then a saucer, and then a funnel. Well, it's sort of like this. You don't want to you don't want to take away so much of this wood in here that you create a funnel. So you have to sort of make sure that you have measurements as you go, and there's a precision tool for that. Okay, I've still got a 1/4 inch in the base. Don't move your head. And I put my thumbnail right there so I have a good accurate guide. But I've got a fairly decent thinness down through there. So I can actually switch tools now. The 1/2 inch gouge will take off a little bit more of that wood faster because the smaller cutting edge will glide through the wood faster. Don't forget to hand spin that. I did my hose on the post there. And spin. So now we're just I had the tool rest a little too high. That's what having to do this to get to the middle. And you don't want to be doing that. They make all kinds of French curve tool rests to do bowls and things like that. A good old straight rest generally will do the job just fine by tilting it in like that. But don't forget to hand rotate it before you turn it back on. Red old maple. Now, I can also make that shearing cut with the same tool, but it's not quite as wide a cutting surface, so it's not quite as efficient at bridging those little ridges in there that you want to get rid of. But it'll do okay. Just remember to drop that handle. Now we want to know where the bottom is for sure. Precision tool. That's funny. We want to leave a little to take out the sandpaper. Okay, now we have the form. We have the conclusion of turning step 2B, and we have the wood right here where it's accessible, so we can sand it. We have our uniform wings that we want, but there's one other thing that really dresses a piece like that up. When you have two parallel edges and they're on an angle like so, because of the fact that I have carved a recess in here, I have changed the parallel areas of the top and the bottom. But this edge is at the diagonal. We have two edges here. That is not a perpendicular edge to it. So what you want to do, I take some 120 paper, some 80 paper on a 3-inch disc, put it in my drill, make sure you hold the edge. I want to square up those thin edges to the two adjoining surfaces. I want it to be perpendicular because then you do have an accurate size for the thickness. If it's the diagonal, you're looking at a false measurement of the thickness. Everybody's going. So that means that I will have this edge at about this angle instead of this angle. That looks thicker than it actually is because I'm looking at the diagonal of that edge and not the square edge itself. That makes a huge difference in the final appearance of your piece. Okay. Now we're ready to reverse it. Step number justify that toy, my tool. But what I quite often do, and anybody who uses jam tucks builds up a collection of them over the years. So you always have one that's about the right size, which I don't have here. I knew I shouldn't have taken this thing off. So a jam chuck, in place of a vacuum chuck, allows you to come back and place this back on the lathe in exactly the same way you started. Because the hole where we started, step number 1, is still there. So it's pretty easy to get it lined up. And of course, you have to do a little fudging around with it sometimes. But you want it, and the more you practice, the luckier you get. What you want is this area down in here running true. You may not have this area up here ever running true. Chip. So, what we want to do now, what we want to do, you might have a battery. So what we want to do now is get rid of the tenon. Because we started with a thin piece of wood, we don't want to leave that piece of junk copper on there. So all we have to do at this stage is turn it off. Spin it by hand. Guys in the front row are saying, I wonder how thin that is. But the guy behind the lathe is saying, I wonder how thin that is. Now, if we have some extra wood here to get rid of, we can do that, but it's a little bit late now. I'm not going to worry about it. This piece is going to have a flat bottom. And because it's a thin piece, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It's not going to wobble or twist too much. Here again, now you have it available to you so you can do your sanding. Finish it up, take it off the lathe. And I use a small chisel of some sort, or a power chisel, to get rid of that nub. Now I'm not carving toward myself like a carver would do. I'm controlling that cut with the palm of my hand against the wood, and I'm not going like so. What I want to get rid of is any evidence of how it was fastened to the lathe. Because a good wood turner does not take a piece to a show with 3 screw holes in the bottom filled with plastic wood, or with green felt glued over it. You want to make sure that how you fasten that piece to the lathe is a mystery. So there's what you end up with. Break time.